It's always nice to be thought of as being a legend. When you've only had one job all your life, you really never want to let it go. The first Australian job I had anything to do with it was just in the Opera House, which really changed my life.
How do you feel coming around the Opera House now?
I was what they call the proof engineer. I had to check all the calculations. Because it was a specialised area,
Yes.
I used to go to Watson's office in Denmark a bit.
Really?
Yeah, so I had a super job. I've had a charmed life at Arup. I was 16, 1950 I joined. Father, who came home one day and said, I've arranged an interview for you for a job. I said, oh, where? And he said, with Ove Arup and Partners. I was interviewed by a man called Geoffrey Woodall. And I got there, and it seemed pretty clear to me that they didn't really want me. They were doing my father a favour, and I thought, well, I'm going to get out of this. They'd already had 2 youngsters, which they'd taken on, and they didn't really want another one. And then the phone rang, and I could judge by the conversation that they were short of players against a team the following week, a team of architects. And Geoffrey put the phone to one side and said, can you play cricket? And I gathered they were short a wicket-keeper. I said, oh, a bit. He said, what do you do? I said, I'll keep wicket. He said, oh, start Monday. And so that's when my career at Arup started, in that auspicious or inauspicious way. And there I was. And they put me to work with Ronald Jenkins and Ronald Hobbs. Ronald Jenkins was a very remote sort of person, but Bob Hobbs was a very jolly man, and well, I seemed to fit in well there. They sent me to school one day a week. I had off to be trained as an engineer. And I settled into this consulting engineering life. And we had architects coming in all the time, architects to talk about their jobs and etc. And it was very instructive. Jenkins was a different sort of man. He worked in his own office next door. He appeared aloof, but I think he was shy. He didn't seem to be a very artistic type. But he had, while I was there working in the office, he had a mural, a fresco sort of thing, painted on his ceiling by Eduardo Palazzi, which became a sort of Arup landmark. Jenkins painting. Jenkins was the world expert on shells, concrete shell construction. At the end of my first year there, I'm still earning £2, 5 shillings, and I noticed that everyone else seemed to have got a rise in salary, but I hadn't. And I actually went to see Ove about it. It was the first time I think I'd ever spoken to Ove. And I said that I couldn't really exist on what he was paying me. And he thought about it. He said, you should tell your father that he should be paying me, not I shouldn't be paying you, he should be paying me for the training we're giving you. But I'll give you a rise. I'll make it £2, 10 shillings a week. So I got the princely sum of 5 shillings extra when I was just coming up to 18. I realised I hadn't really succeeded to my expectations, and I thought, well, I'm never going to do that again. But he was easy, he was an approachable person, nice man. Ove was the boss, and he had a presence, he was a big man. And it would be rare to find anyone that came to work for Ove that didn't read up about him. And Ove had a history. He had a history that was worth reading and meaningful to us all. And so we had a sort of reverence for him, like a grandfather. So I spent most of my national service overseas, and it was really enjoyable. And I got an extra string to my bow, as it were, being in another discipline, which actually helped a lot. I was trained to be an electrical engineer in transmitters, and I did a 10-month course. Then I was sent to Egypt and then to Cyprus. I actually got a job because of that Air Force experience in Egypt and Cyprus. I moved about quite a bit in the firm, which I liked. The leader of the firm for many years was a man called Sir Jack Zuntz, and he started the same month as me, and we both worked for Ronald Hobbs. And so in a way, he became my mentor, Jack Zuntz. And most things I've done in life have been with him, with Arups. But the thing that really changed my life was the Opera House. To be perfectly honest, I had thought I wanted to work on the Opera House. And I'd been thinking, how do I get to work on the Opera House? And here was someone saying to me, would you like to work on the Opera House? And what's more, if you say yes, we'll give you £100 bonus. So I worked on the substructure of the Opera House. I worked on the stage machineries and the base itself, and then I worked on the shells. We were about 50 of us working on the Opera House, and we worked in a sort of collegiate manner. And we'd have a meeting every Friday afternoon to discuss what we'd done on that week and where we were going for the next week. It's amazing how much you can learn from just being and sitting next to and watching and listening to people. And the Opera House really was a turning point in my life, really. But it wasn't without its problems. I mean, it needed a colossal amount of engineering power to get that thing up and running. Base structures were bigger, better, things that we'd done before. But when we came actually to the roofs, nothing like that had been done. The mental pressure was actually enormous. If I wanted to design a typical rib of the Opera House shells now, I could probably put some data into a computer program and 5 minutes later it would spit out the answer. But then in those days, it used to take to design one rib was like 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hard graft on a hand calculator. No such thing as electronic calculators. They're all hand calculators. And it was hard work. And then, of course, a computer came along, and there were two of them, I think, in academic circles. And we used the one down at Northampton Polytechnic, which is now City University. And on a Friday night, a man called Peter Rice, and he and I used to go down to Northampton Poly on a Friday night and lock ourselves in there for the weekend and just process whole reams of teleprinter tape into a computer that worked out what our shells were doing. We're a big, fluid bunch of people, and we didn't hesitate in asking each other what we were doing and how we were doing it. We had to do things with concrete that hadn't been done. The codes of practice didn't account for what we were trying to do, and the construction started before the roof had been designed. I mean, so we were designing half of it, not knowing how the other half was going to fit there. The Labour government here in this state was hanging on by its fingertips, and it wanted to get the thing up and running and started so it was irrevocable before they lost power. Quantity surveyor said it was going to cost, I don't know, I think he thought it was going to cost $3.5 million. And of course it ended up costing like $115 million. So there was a big error in the judgment there. And then when I came back from there, I worked on the Stock Exchange redevelopment. Well, the Stock Exchange was an interesting building. It had to be built while the Stock Exchange was still going on. But it was working on the Stock Exchange that I was asked to go to Australia, really. And that, of course, was another event that changed my life. I remember that it was the day after the budget. So it's probably end of March 1967. Yeah, about 67, I think. And Harold Wilson, I remember, was the treasurer. And he brought in this budget where everything was going to be raised. Papers said, fags up, beer up. That was their headline, And my wife said to me, and this is honest truth, she took me to the station and she said, if anyone offers you a job overseas today, for goodness sake, take it. So I got to work. When I got to work, someone said, Ove's secretary has been on the phone for you. And I went to see Ove. And Ove, at that time, we'd moved into number 13 Fitzroy Street. And he said, would like a cup of coffee? I said, yes, I want to talk to you about Australia. He said, we'll have some coffee. And he got out his cups and saucers and stuff, and he went into the kitchen to make the coffee, and the cups and saucers were, strange. And I picked up one of the plates and I looked underneath it, and it had written on it, to my friend Ove Arup, Pablo Picasso. And so we were going to have our morning coffee out of a Pablo Picasso original tea service or coffee service. And I thought to myself, don't drop the cup. Don't drop the cup. And he said he'd just been to Perth. Wonderful place, wonderful, wonderful. And at that time, Perth was in its first mining boom. He said, did I want to go? And I said, yeah, of course I wanted to go, yeah. But in true Arup fashion, in those days, they didn't slash out money. My wife and family, 3 kids, we came as assisted migrants, the £10 scheme, which took until August that year to get through. And I was dying to see the Opera House. All the shelves were up, and we swung round the road onto the Cahill Expressway, and there was the Opera House. We came to Sydney to be Australianised, as it were. There was a greater degree of intellectual freedom in Australia than there was in England. In England, you were still, in a way, straitjacketed by history, even your own history. And but it wasn't like that in Australia. People would come in, a developer would come in, or an architect would come in and say, I've got an option on this site up the road here till Thursday, and we've got to put together a scheme, and a cost. And I was doing that sort of thing, so you had to design like a whole building in 2 days, and someone would cost it to see if the man would actually buy the site and do the job. And that, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but it was this almost frenzy of thinking going on the whole time. There was excitement in the air in Perth. It was an exciting time. That brings out exciting people. And so people were wanting to do things there. And the name Arup opened every door in Perth. So I got to know people in our industry pretty quickly due to that. We were probably the biggest structural practice in Perth. In the very early days, we did a pencil drawing, then inked it in, as it were. As you got better, you didn't have to pencil it, you inked it from the beginning. A draftsman always has a way of doing his drawings that is particular to him, and took a great pride in their work. You could always tell a drawing done by a particular, you could hang it up and use it as a decoration almost. They were so beautiful. And of course, then 20, 25 years later, computers came along, and we do all the drawings done on computers now. I think the high-rise buildings we did in Perth were, they were standout, especially Allendale Square. That was a very, very high-tech building for its time. Another piece of luck I had in Perth was that the Professor of Architecture at the university was an old friend of Ove's, Murdoch University. And he was the architect for the first triennium, and he appointed us as engineers. So we had 3 years' work on that university. I was made a partner, I think, in 1970 or 71, something like that. I got a call from Michael Lewis in Sydney saying, come to Sydney. Very important thing has happened. We're going to be appointed for the OCBC Centre in Singapore. And so I went to Sydney. And the second most important building in my career came to pass. The OCBC was a fantastic project. It was 52 stories high. I mean, it's fairly big by today's standard, that height. And I think at the time it would have been the tallest building Arups had ever done. So it was a trailblazer that way. The bank, it was Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation. And it had this wonderful folklore attached to it where the chairman, a man called Tan Chin Tuan, had been the office manager. Whenever you went to see him in his office, he always had 2 guards outside with rifles. It was very daunting. But however, and he wanted a bank that was going to be the building in Singapore. And they had worked out that if we could build the building within 2 years or something, it would be worth 50 million Singapore dollars. And so we had to find a way of building this building quicker than we would normally because, with the best will in the world, a 52-storey building is going to take a bit of a while to build. But it was an exciting time. You have to design to what is there on the ground. And we're lucky in Australia in that you can design anything here because we have a very good steel industry and we have probably the best concrete industry in the whole world here. We know we're very, very good at pre-stressing, slip forming, strength of concrete because we have wonderful aggregates here. We have the right materials to make it. Another important thing on OCBC was that the client came to us one day and said that we're going to clad the building in Carrara marble. we'd like you to engineer the cladding as a different contract, different fee, etc. And we did. And I think that the genesis of Arup Facade Engineering came from that job, because we did that job. And when we came to, for instance, Grosvenor Place in Sydney, we had a very large facade commission there. And we used the same sort of techniques there that we'd used up on the OCBC. And that is now a very important part of the Arup business worldwide, facade engineering. And I like to think that in our humble way, we started that off in Singapore. Around about that time, we also did Ulara, which is at Ayers Rock. We did the development there. We did all the civil and structural work there with Philip Cox as the architect. That was interesting, making a town out of nothing in the desert. Having to build a power station, find the water, that sort of thing. That was interesting. So there were always interesting projects coming along. In terms of work, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to say this, but every single job I ever had, I wanted to do a bit of it, but I always designed some of it. And I always knew what other people were designing. And so Arups allows you to do that. The crazy thing is, the first thing I do in the morning is turn my computer on, and the second website I go to is the Arup website, just to see whether they're emailing me, offering me a job. But I do. I like to be in touch. I like to know what's going on. I read the bulletins. The bulletin comes, and the Arup Journal comes, and I read them all, and I ring people up and congratulate them on being promoted. And I've never, ever not wanted to be in touch. I've always wanted to be. Well, the firm and the people are the one thing, really. It's hard to put it into words without being emotional about it. We used to work in a slum compared with what this place is here. It looks like as if one was in a university. Great atmosphere. We've come a long way. We always thought of ourselves as being the best, and I think that ethic has stayed with us. I think if you work for Arup, you want to be the best at whatever you do. You can't imagine what a thrill it is to have some plans, do your own drawings, do some calculations, give it to a builder, and see it come up out of the ground. Something that's just lines on paper is actually a thing. The intellectual stimulus and the satisfaction you get is worth any amount of money. Everything that's happened to me is thanks to them. And it's been a wonderful journey. I'm proud of the fact that I helped run a firm, or be in a firm that's still there, still going strong, stronger and stronger, upward and upward. And I feel part of that foundation. I've done my bit. That's what I'm happy about. It is a very special firm, and I'm proud to have been a part of it.